Life can be messy, but you don't have to figure it out alone.
Hey, it's the Luskos.
Join pastors and best-selling authors Levi and Jenny Lusko on Hey, It's the Luskos for honest conversations about faith, marriage, family, grief, ministry, and all the unexpected moments in between. You'll laugh, you'll be encouraged, and you'll be reminded that God is faithful through every season.
It will always come back to Jesus in the end.
That's right. Tune in to Hey, It's the Luskos with Levi and Jenny Lusko. Available now wherever you get your podcasts.
Well, hi, everyone, and welcome to Alzheimer's Speaks Radio. I'm your host, Lori LeBay, and I'm so excited that you're joining us today. We are going to have a fascinating conversation, as usual, as we learn from people all around the world at all ages and stages of life. Stay tuned as we shift our dementia care from crisis to comfort.
Here we go. What you think about, you will bring about dementia change. We will.
Well, hi, everyone. Welcome to Alzheimer's Speaks. I'm thrilled you can be with us today. We are so lucky to have Lance A. Slatton with us. He is my co-host on Conscious Caregiving with L&L, and just an amazing, amazing guy doing wonderful work. And he just launched his brand new book called Caregiving in America. And it's all about understanding, supporting, and transforming this invisible responsibility that is handed down to so many families with no education and no guidance. And I think this book is going to be life-changing for many. But before we pull Lance in, I always like to encourage people to check out Alzheimer's Speaks and go to our free educational resources. We have tons of things in different mediums that can help you at absolutely no cost, and you don't have to sign up for an account or anything. Same with a Dementia Map, which is our growing global resource directory. There you can search for services, products, and tools that you need, because not everything needs to be in your backyard anymore. There's so much help out there for people, and that's what we want to give you here on Alzheimer's Speaks. We want to be the connector for you. And last, I want to give a shout out to Q for Good. They're my webmasters. They are brilliant. They're easy to work with. They're economical, and they're on time. And so check them out if you're in need, or if you're thinking about it, get a bit from them. Anyways, let's go and pull back the curtain and talk with Lance. Well, Lance, I'm so glad to have you back on the show. And I feel so privileged to be talking to you about this brand new book that you have just launched. And I think it's just going to be a miracle for so many people. It is so concise and loaded with so many angles when you're caregiving that you don't even think about until it slaps you in the face, and then you're drowning, in the ocean, kind of going, where's my lifeline? I think this is going to be a lifeline for many, many people all around the world, not just in the U.S. So I know that's kind of how you framed your book, Caregiving in America. But before we get started, we always get new listeners. Can you give people a little bit of background on yourself?
Sure. Well, my name is Lance A. Slatton, and I am honored to call myself Lori's friend. I'm the host of All Home Care Matters, the president of AlzAuthors, and we have a family home care company here in Michigan that's been in business for about 15 years now.
Thank you. One of the other things that I always ask all my guests, and I know you inside and out, but again, some of our listeners might not, is have you been personally touched with dementia in your family or circle of friends?
Yes. Well, my grandmother, who I was almost as close to as my own mother, she developed dementia when I was in my late teens. And it was one of those situations, like I'm sure, millions of other families had. We didn't know anything was really wrong. My grandmother lived down south, and she was a traditional Southern belle, if you will, where she was from the era She never got a driver's license, never worked outside of the home, though she surely worked inside the home, raising, 6 children and being a housemaker. And when my grandfather passed, she was left with no way to get anywhere, to drive herself. So she was at the home literally 24/7. And, my uncles and aunts would stop by because they all lived down there as well. And, but that was just the occasional visit or dinner, dropping off a fresh gallon of milk, what have you. And it really kind of presented itself when my grandmother started calling the local police station a few times in one week at, very, odd hours of the morning and late at night. And they finally notified my uncle because they knew him and said, we've been to your mom's house now. This is our third time. And she's convinced there are people in the other area of the home having parties. In fact, she's blaming you, speaking to my uncle. And if she does it again, though, we're going to have to intercede and we're going to have to take some action, meaning we're going to have to take her to the hospital to get checked out. In most cities, they probably would not have gone that far and let it go on that long. But, whether you think that's a good thing or a bad thing, we were then notified. And so I literally was home from college and I loaded up and drove all the way down there, picked my grandmother up, helped pack a bunch of suitcases. And then she came to live with us. And during those several years that she was living with us, we never saw any sign of dementia whatsoever. And because she was now engaged, she was being stimulated, she had some purpose, if you will, back in her life. And, she would go on vacations with us at Christmas and different things. And the dementia, though, did start creeping back and it did start, showing itself again. And, ultimately she did have to go into a nursing home. And it was one of the hardest things, but I got to witness, what dementia did to a family firsthand at a very young age, where for me, most of my friends in my social circle at that age, they had no idea really what dementia was or Alzheimer's. It was, oh, that's a crazy old person, So I gained a great appreciation for it because I would go every day to the nursing home and sit with her for a couple of hours. And, just so she wasn't scared and she wasn't alone. And, so yes, that was my personal connection to it.
It's so interesting, when the police get involved, how it's handled. And especially from back then to now, there's a little bit more knowledge, but there still isn't a whole heck of a lot, and something like that could have even been like a UTI. There's so many different aspects, but you don't know what you don't know as a family member, if they're not calling you. So thank goodness the police did, reach out and contact you so you could know.
Absolutely. And I personally, I don't, like I said, Lori, my opinion, just from a personal side, because it's my grandmother, I'm emotionally attached and things. I'm thankful they didn't take her and, put her in a psych hospital. And then we had to go through all of that red tape and different things. But the other side of me too is thankful because they didn't do that my grandmother didn't hurt herself or something didn't happen that maybe then could have been avoided by them interjecting sooner. I mean, there's a lot of different, what ifs that go through your head. But, this is a small town. Like I said, they knew our family very well. My uncle was good friends with several of the officers and, there's more small town America and, I don't know if it would be handled the same way today, but it was fortunate that at least they finally decided, well, we better let the family know because something's definitely not right here.
Yeah, for sure. And again, with every decision that has to be made regarding caring for somebody, it's a guess. Right. It's making the best possible decision at the time, and you might not agree with it, but typically people are making the best decision they can with the information that they have. And again, thankful that the police did reach out to you. Now, Lance, your book is incredibly comprehensive, and it really takes a look at everything that a family could be touched by when caregiving kind of knocks on their door or literally bangs it down and just walks through. Many times it's not invited in. It happens. Like in your situation, there was just a switch that was flipped. So what I'm curious about is, and I'm curious with this, with just about every author that I talk with, is What made you decide to write the book? There had to be something at your core that said, now's the time to do this.
Yeah, I really, Lori, I felt like this was the book that I needed to write because caregiving affects millions of families across America, yet so many people still enter that role completely unprepared. What I kept seeing, and you may also see this yourself, was that the information caregivers need, it exists, but it's often fragmented. You may find one resource about dementia, another about Medicare, another about home care, another about legal planning, and another about caregiver burnout. But when you're actually living through caregiving, you don't have the time or the emotional bandwidth to search in 10 different places for 10 different answers. So what I wanted was Caregiving in America to bring those pieces all together. I also felt something was missing from the larger conversation. We talk about caregiving as though it's simply a private family responsibility, but caregiving affects healthcare. It affects employment, retirement, finances, relationships, housing, long-term care, public policy. It impacts the entire country. So my goal was not simply to just write about another caregiving book. I wanted to create a comprehensive resource that really recognizes caregiving for what it really is, one of the most significant personal, economic, healthcare, and societal issues that affect Americans everywhere.
That is so true. It's kind of this big spider web, but you don't even know you're caught in it. And then trying to get over to where you need to go without getting stuck. I mean, one example is just attorneys. Okay, I need to talk to an attorney. No, you need to talk to an elder law attorney because it's very different in terms of how they structure. And people don't know the terms or the whys a lot of times behind the services, products, or tools that can help them, or they don't even know they exist to begin with. They don't know what to ask for. So, people go, well, they can Google it. Well, you can't Google what you don't know you even need. And I love that you brought up, the whole bandwidth thing, because time is so critical, and so many caregivers are up in the middle of the night, doing the Google thing and trying to do their research, and then they're not getting their sleep. And then that adds, to issues as well with burnout and all of that kind of stuff. So very, very critical. Now, you also had a really personal journey with your dad in caregiving. And I'm interested if you wouldn't mind sharing that with our audience and how that kind of changed your perspective and what you wanted to do with your own life.
Caring for someone with dementia is one of the toughest journeys, but you don't have to do it alone. I'm Allison Schreier, and my experience caring for my husband inspired me to create Zinnia, a therapeutic streaming service designed to support people living with dementia and reduce caregiver stress. Zinnia offers research-backed videos intentionally created for people with dementia, engaging, calming, and easy to follow. Whether you need to ease agitation, create moments of joy, or make daily routines smoother, Zinnia is here to help. Family and professional caregivers use our content to turn challenges into opportunities for connection. Accessible by subscription on mobile devices and connected TVs, Zinnia is simple to use whenever you need it. Because when caregiving feels easier, life feels better. Go to zinniatv.com and sign up for a free trial today. Use the code RESOURCE for 15% off an annual Zinnia subscription.
Hey listeners, it's Kelly from Life Audio. We know life gets busy, and sometimes it's easy for your faith to get pushed to the side. That's why we created The Good Word, a free weekly newsletter designed to give you a moment to slow down, be encouraged, and reconnect with what matters most, God's Word. Inside, you'll find devotionals, guided prayers, podcast recommendations, and other faith-filled content we think you'll love. No ads, no clutter. Just good content to help you stay rooted in God's Word throughout your week. Sign up for The Good Word today at lifeaudio.com/The Good Word. That's lifeaudio.com/The Good Word.
Yeah. Well, as some may know, and I know Lori, I was actually never seeking or sought out this, and this space. I was actually pursuing medical school, and I was preparing to apply, and my whole life was built upon that rock. Yeah. And then my wife and I, received a phone call from a nurse about my father needing care, and what followed became roughly 3 years of being deeply involved in his caregiving through 7 major surgeries and an incredibly difficult period for our family. And at that time, I had no idea that experience would ultimately change the entire trajectory of my life. It changed how I understood healthcare. It changed how I understood families. And it taught me that there's an enormous difference between knowing something professionally and actually living it out as a son, daughter, spouse, or a family caregiver. And so that personal experience is really what has been woven throughout the book, Caregiving in America. But I was very intentional about making sure the book wasn't simply just my story. My story is in there to help illuminate some of the larger experiences shared by millions of families. But one of the biggest lessons that I hope people will carry with them is that caregiving rarely unfolds according to a perfect plan. You are going to encounter decisions you never anticipated. You're going to have moments when you question yourself, and sometimes there simply isn't the perfect right answer. You just make the best answer that you think is in the best interest of your loved one and yourself. And what families can do is become informed and help answer and ask those questions and prepare earlier, build that support system and understand the options available to them. Knowledge cannot eliminate every difficult moment, but it can make those moments much more manageable.
I love that you talk about the professional perspective versus the personal, because that's where I come from too. It's just like, whoa, it's really different than what you think it is on this side of the line. And, to me, that's one of the things that I've loved working with you on, is raising that personal experience voice, because it's so rich and full of great information. And we can't just take one path or the other. They really need to be merged if we're going to make healthy, good choices, and we're going to maintain our sanity and everyone's dignity in the process of it. We need as much knowledge as possible. The other thing you mentioned was, making that decision. It might be right, it might be wrong, but the other thing I just want to highlight, so our audience doesn't miss it, is you might be the person in charge to make the decision, and not everyone in your family is going to agree all the time. And that is very common, and that can be a whole nother, set of dynamics that you have to deal with on top of caring for this person. And at times, and I'm sure you've seen this too, the whole family dynamics can shift all of a sudden. And the family might not be so close, or they might rally behind you. I mean, you don't know. And so you have to really be, if you're assigned that responsibility, it's nice to be able to talk with the family. But again, every family's a little bit unique in terms of how they make decisions. And there can be some really big consequences. But again, your job is to make the best decision for the person at hand, not always the family at large. And that can really come into play with some of the finances and things, where things can get twisted and turned. So thanks for sharing your personal experience. I think that's powerful for people to understand.
Well, if I could add one thing to that, Lori, just briefly, you have a personal story, and you're doing what you do with Alzheimer's Speaks, Dementia Map, Conscious Caregiving. I have my personal experience, and I use that now. But I think what helps is you and I, and many others as well who are in this space, we have that personal experience. We've lived it, we've walked it, we've been a part of it. And I think that goes a long way in being able to speak to these issues, but also being able to, be sympathetic and empathetic to families when we're talking with them and they're, in a crisis that I will say, I was in at many times with my father's situation, and being able to relate to what it is they're going through. It may not be an exact scenario, but the emotions are often very similar, though the circumstances may be slightly different. And so we're wanting to help lift up these caregivers, because there's still such a gap, I feel like, between our healthcare and our, I call it social care for caregivers, being able to connect the two so that they get those resources and that support at the point of contact with their loved ones, doctors, or, professionals that are a part of their care.
And it's interesting to see, if you get a cancer diagnosis, you get a lead person and you get a list of supports, if you're going to need a wig or you're going to need this or blah, 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 something to lift your spirits. I mean, there's so many different aspects to it. When you get another disease, and I'll use dementia because that's my little forte, you get nothing. You got 5 to 7 years, and half the time you don't even get told we have an Alzheimer's association, let alone all the other thousands of resources that are available. And so evening out the playing field in some of this stuff, I think is really critical, which kind of ties into my next question, because, the theme of your book is not just the issues for the family, but it's really issues for the whole U.S. and all the little economic pockets, like you talked about earlier, the finances, the healthcare, the employment, aging in general, the public policy and things like that. And I know one of the things you talked about is, your experience helps you kind of point those things out and have empathy. But I think the other thing that you and I both do is we can offer suggestions for improvement. And I don't think that's always listened to. And sometimes it's more of a quota thing. I got to check off the list that I talked to somebody, but it's really not taken and amplified and implemented. And so I'm just curious if you feel that way as well. And, what do you think America is really failing at in terms of this process?
Yeah, well, real quick, I'm going to answer that. But, as you were explaining, like with dementia, and, I consider you the Mount Rushmore of dementia educators and, supporters. I call it diagnose and adios. I did not come up with that term. A good friend of mine did, but that's so often the experience that families have. You get that diagnosis and it's like, okay, bye, we'll see you in, 6 months or whatever the case may be. And it's unfortunate. And that's why I think, at least for myself, and maybe you too, Lori, that's a large part of why I do what I do, is because I don't want families to have that experience and feel like they're not sure where to turn or what's available. But to answer your question, I think one of the biggest things America still really fails to recognize is that family caregivers are functioning as an enormous, largely invisible part of our healthcare and long-term care infrastructure. I think we tend to think of caregiving as something that just happens privately inside a family. But when someone leaves work early to take a parent to an appointment, or reduces their work hours because their spouse needs care, or spends their savings modifying a home, manages medications, coordinates doctors, navigates dementia, fights with the insurance companies, which I'm sure everybody can relate to that one, or wakes up multiple times throughout the night to be able to provide care, that has consequences far beyond the household. It affects the employers. It affects the healthcare utilization. It affects retirement security. It affects mental and physical health. It affects our long-term care system and our economy. And often the caregiver is expected to simply absorb all of that. We've built an enormous amount of our long-term care system around the assumption that a family member will somehow be there always to fill those gaps. But now families are smaller. My mother came from a family of 6 siblings, my father from 8. My kids are coming from a family of now 3 siblings, and there's not as much, children support for their older parents later in life, and people live farther apart. People are working longer. The population is aging, and care is becoming increasingly more complex. If we continue treating family caregivers as an unlimited resource, eventually that system becomes unsustainable. Supporting caregivers shouldn't simply be viewed as compassion for families. I want it to be, but it shouldn't just be that. It should also be viewed as an essential part of our healthcare policy, workforce policy, aging policy, and our economic policy.
I agree. And I think part of the problem too is we've gotten so task focused, and we forget about the human being in front of us and what they're going through. And we've done that in our workplace with our work shortage, I think, by stripping out that relationship based care. Or, and I don't care what kind of work you do, when you have a relationship with people, a good one, you work as a team then. And we've stripped that from pretty much most of our corporations, which has had a huge impact on the healthcare side, in my opinion. And, when we do that with our families, we think we can just throw them a task. Well, they need to know how to do the task and why to do the task and when to do the task. And a lot of times we're just thinking, no, it has to get done. It has to get done. It has to get done. And I know for myself as a caregiver, it was like, I got to check it off. I got to get it done. But when and how you do it makes a whole difference in how the whole day is going to turn out, and the dignity of the person. And when you were talking about the finances and the time, and one of the statistics, and I haven't read the most recent one, maybe you're up on it, but a lot of caregivers die before their journey caring is up, because of the stress and the wear and the tear. So we're depleting our caregivers as well in this whole process. And that to me is really very, very spooky, especially when you've got a rundown care partner who's trying to do the best they can. That's going to diminish their decision making and their abilities to get things done and track things, and that can be harmful for both of them.
Right. Yeah, absolutely.
And now all of a sudden we've got two people that need to be cared for.
Caring for someone with dementia is one of the toughest journeys, but you don't have to do it alone. I'm Allison Schreier, and my experience caring for my husband inspired me to create Zinnia, a therapeutic streaming service designed to support people living with dementia and reduce caregiver stress. Zinnia offers research-backed videos intentionally created for people with dementia, engaging, calming, and easy to follow. Whether you need to ease agitation, create moments of joy, or make daily routines smoother, Zinnia is here to help. Family and professional caregivers use our content to turn challenges into opportunities for connection. Accessible by subscription on mobile devices and connected TVs, Zinnia is simple to use whenever you need it. Because when caregiving feels easier, life feels better. Go to zinniatv.com and sign up for a free trial today. Use the code RESOURCE for 15% off an annual Zinnia subscription.
Now, your book, goes beyond kind of telling caregivers to take care of themselves, because that's the common thing. Just carve out some time, and you're like, when? How?
Right.
I mean, I couldn't even go. I wouldn't even let myself go have coffee with my friends. And I actually got mad at them for bucking me. The nerve. Don't they see what I'm carrying and what I'm doing? And yet those pieces are so critical. We're not talking about the why those things are so important. And so you really address some of the difficult realities of burnout and conflict, and that conflict can be on so many levels, because it can be the emotional level, it can be on a legal level, it can be on family dynamics, it can be religious, it can be distance. I mean, it doesn't end. And as soon as you think you got it figured out, boom, you don't.
Right.
There's something else that lands on your lap. So when a caregiver is feeling overwhelmed and really doesn't know, the beginning from the end, what do you hope the book will give them?
Well, first and foremost, I hope it gives them a place to begin. One of the hardest parts of caregiving is that everything can feel urgent all at the same time. There may be a medical decision that needs to be made, financial questions, family disagreements, safety concerns, the legal documents, medications, appointments, care options. And meanwhile, you're still trying to manage your own life on top of this other person's life that has a lot more complex needs and, issues associated with it. When people are overwhelmed, they don't necessarily need another person telling them to take care of themselves, right? They need practical information. They need to know, what do I do first? What questions should I be asking? What documents do I need to have? What resources are out there? What type of care might be appropriate? What is the difference between Medicare and Medicaid, and how do they differ? What happens if my loved one has dementia? How do we pay for the care? What if the siblings are disagreeing? What happens when home is no longer a safe option? And that's why, the book really includes practical guidance, checklists, worksheets, resources, explanations that families can actually use. I don't expect anyone to sit down and memorize hundreds of pages. I want them to be able to return to the book throughout that caregiving journey and say, this is the problem I'm dealing with now. Where do I start? If the book can replace some of that confusion with, firsthand knowledge and direction, then it's done what I hope that it would do.
And this is a big book. How many pages?
Yeah. So the hardcover and paperback are 766 pages, and the ebook, because it's ebook and the pages are a lot smaller and it's electronic, it's like 1,400 pages. But who's counting, Lori?
But again, I mention that because of the amount of detail that's in here. So this isn't a book that, in my opinion, that you're just going to read and put down and remember. It's going to be a reference. It's going to be like your personal Bible to caregiving, and a true resource where you're probably going to go in with little stickies or highlighters or whatever, and even use it as ammunition when you're having those family talks. Like, no, this is a resource we need to check out.
Well, and I would say the publisher called it an institutional book for caregivers. Mm-hmm. So instead of it being an institutional book for a college campus, it's an institutional book for a family caregiver. And I just want to preface that, yes, there are a lot of pages, but in the back, there's an entire full glossary of terms and definitions, fully detailed and explained, a resource guide for all 50 of our states, a national resource guide for the nation, but then there's worksheets and, questions and answers and things to think of. And, for instance, a lot of families we talk to with our company, they're sometimes looking at, well, is assisted living the right option for our loved one, or is maybe home care? And a lot of times they fall into the assumption, and I don't blame them because it's great marketing, that assisted living is going to provide all of the care their loved one needs and give them a nice place to live with food. And, some of that's true, but not all of that's true. And so, there's kind of definitions and deep explanations as to what the different senior living and care options are and what they provide and what they don't provide. If you're going to go take a tour of assisted living, here's some good questions to ask them, because not all assisted living are one size fits all. Your loved one's needs may outgrow what their particular assisted living facility offers, but other assisted livings have step up units where, it can kind of change with their care as their care changes. So it's a lot of good information all around. I tried to include everything, that I could think of that a family may encounter or may have questions on. I'm sure there's something I missed, but I think it's going to be very comprehensive and a great support for family caregivers.
A couple of things I want to point out. One, I should have gone back a little earlier, but when it comes to caregiving, to let people know this isn't a line in the sand. Typically for most people, like, you got a call from the police. That was a line in the sand. That was a crisis situation. But a lot of times caregiving kind of just creeps in, Yeah. And it's a gentle thing. And then you don't, you're getting groceries and, oh yeah, I can swing by and pick up the medications or help you with the laundry. Sure. Oh, we can cut the grass. These little things just keep happening. And then it becomes kind of full blown, and you sit back and go, wow, when did this happen?
When did it happen? Yeah, absolutely.
And so I just want to make sure that people are aware of that. I love that you have all of the resources in there in the forms, so people can chicken scratch out what's going to work for them. And I think it's really important too, when you mentioned documents that you need. We always hear about, you've got to get that power of attorney. You have to get that healthcare directive. And, one of my pet peeves, and I don't know if it's one of yours, but again, this is a correctional point that, we talk about at times where the clinics just have to start giving this information out in whole to people. And even if they're coming in independent and just talking with their clients going, you really need to have this stuff completed. And this is the time you want to pull a family member in before there's a crisis on these things to be able to set you up. But I know I found it's like, oh yeah, you can call and make an appointment. Oh, but you can't access the portal. You'll need another form for that. And you can do this, but you can't. And it's like, just don't put it in a pack, because families don't know that you have all these different rules. You do. And families don't know that they can get that even when they're in the hospital. Request, a social worker to come in. So it's all those types of things that you're pointing out to people in this book. And like you said, they don't know all the places they can even grab this stuff from, because no one's telling them they do it.
Exactly. Yeah. In a perfect world, Lori, I don't know if it was you that said it. Somebody had said to me once, and I think it's genius. When you take a loved one to an appointment, it would be wonderful if they start viewing that caregiver as a quote unquote non-medical patient. You take care of the health checkup and, exam for the person you're caring for, but then turn to the caregiver and give them a checklist. Are there things you need? How are you doing? Do you have questions? Is there a way we can better support you so you can continue supporting your loved one? I think that would eliminate, not all of it, but I think it would go a long way in helping to reduce some of the health issues like you discussed earlier that caregivers experience as a result of caring for their loved ones.
And how do I communicate with you as a clinic, as a doctor?
Right.
What is, they don't tell you that, you have to kind of scope that out. And for the younger population, they'll hop onto the portal and not a problem. Right. Well, most of them will. I know my daughter, she hates that because she just doesn't like her data being out there and stuff. But, a lot of our older individuals aren't comfortable with the portal. Yeah. They don't understand all that stuff. Or, even when some of our large organizations and government agencies change up their website, they don't, in my opinion, for what it's worth, they don't really truly take into consideration how the end user accesses it and what's important to them. We hear that all the time, and it's like, if this is who you're serving, that's got to be a priority. And so, again, having all the resources that you've got in the book is just incredible. That's gonna help so many people, and it's just gonna help people sleep at night. Because I hope so. You feel so lost. And when you talked about the terms in the medical field, people just throw around these acronyms, and the patient and the family caregivers, they don't want to look stupid, so a lot of times they don't ask. Right. And then by the time they leave, they forget, what was that I was going to check out, because I don't really know what that means anymore. And it's gotten a little better with some of the printouts and stuff that they do. But again, they should be defining what those diseases are instead of just listing them. They've got that ability now to do that. So again, I think, your book as a resource is just going to help so many. And hopefully professionals are going to look at this. Hopefully insurance companies are going to look at this, and hospitals and clinics, and say, boy, we have to do things a little bit different, or wouldn't this be a great resource for us to be able to have for our patients and our families? Because they're not giving stuff like that out on a whole. No. They have their own little brochures and their own little workbooks, that really, they don't dive in, to the depth that you've dived into.
Caring for someone with dementia is one of the toughest journeys, but you don't have to do it alone. I'm Allison Schreier, and my experience caring for my husband inspired me to create Zinnia, a therapeutic streaming service designed to support people living with dementia and reduce caregiver stress. Zinnia offers research-backed videos intentionally created for people with dementia, engaging, calming, and easy to follow. Whether you need to ease agitation, create moments of joy, or make daily routines smoother, Zinnia is here to help. Family and professional caregivers use our content to turn challenges into opportunities for connection. Accessible by subscription on mobile devices and connected TVs, Zinnia is simple to use whenever you need it. Because when caregiving feels easier, life feels better. Go to zinniatv.com and sign up for a free trial today. Use the code RESOURCE for 15% off an annual Zinnia subscription.
One of the things that I want to talk about, and we've touched on some of it, but with your readers of your book, and by readers I mean both family and professionals, because I think everybody really needs to get this book and have it as a resource when they go and they're preparing to care, if it's again family or professionals. When someone finishes reading, the last page of the book, and they might bop around in it, and that's okay, because
Sure.
It really is a resource book. But what's the one thing that you hope has changed for both those family members and those professionals and those leaders?
For both professional and the family caregiver, I hope they see caregiving differently.
Mm-hmm.
For the person who's already caregiving, I hope they feel more informed, more supported, more prepared, and better equipped to advocate not only for themselves, but also for the person that they love. For someone, this would be more for the professional. For someone who's not yet become a caregiver, or maybe they're a professional, I hope the book encourages them to have conversations now instead of waiting for a crisis. Talk about these issues like finances, or about where somebody may want to live and what those options look like. Talk about healthcare wishes and understand the documents that you may need, and learn about what care actually costs. So many families assume, and rightly they wouldn't know otherwise, that like with home care, whether it's us or someone in Minnesota or California or New York, home care does not have the ability to bill Medicare. Medicare does not pay for home care. Home care is that non-medical, that's just a Medicare term. It doesn't actually mean it's not medical, support services. So we help families with home care, helps families with all of their activities of daily living. They can help them, monitor their fluid intakes, make sure they get their medications, their personal hygiene, getting to their appointments, getting prescriptions refilled, everything they need to continue living independently with assistance. And for policymakers, healthcare leaders, employers, and, any others who have the ability to create this change, I hope they come away with an understanding that caregiving cannot continue to remain as just an afterthought. As we've discussed, caregiving touches almost every family. If not now, it will eventually. And the biggest change that I would hope for is that people stop viewing caregiving simply as something families have to figure out on their own, and begin viewing it more as something we as a society collectively have a responsibility to better prepare and support. Because ultimately how we support caregivers says a great deal about how we value our aging population, our families, our dignity, and each other.
No, that is so true. And I just look at communities. I mean, I'm 67 and I look back at my neighborhood where I grew up. We were a community. We were connected. We knew one another. Our kids could knock on a door and go to the bathroom or get a Band-Aid or a sandwich or a ride home. I mean, it was safe. We don't live in that environment. For our elders, the young kids were cutting the grass and shoveling the snow and grabbing the mail and, bringing over food. I mean, I don't see that anymore. And I don't see even like with our churches aren't as involved as they used to be. I see a lot of those services being cut, and we've relied on them, and some of them are doing fabulous jobs, but I've seen that just pull back, just the structure of what is community. And I blame it on the garage door, because ever since we drive in and that door shuts, we don't have to talk. We can pick up our mail without talking to the neighbor. And there's this disconnect, and there's this life of busyness. And now we have this super busy life that we can barely keep up with as it is. And now we got to take on another life on top of it. And one of the things that I want to mention too that I love about your book is there's so much information. I think everybody, wants a list of A to B to, all the way to Z. What order do I have to get things done? And it depends on your situation. What is the priority? And so you really have to almost develop a team and pull that doctor in that you trust. And if you don't trust, get a second opinion, because if you don't have a good working relationship, or if it's home care, or if it's where they live, whatever, you've got to have good communication and a good working relationship with those things. And I think sometimes people just feel that they've checked it off and then they're stuck. Anything else that you want to add? I just, like I said, I can't say enough good things about your book. And I just can't even imagine the time it's taken you to write this book, though I know you're fast at everything. And
well, this wasn't very fast. Just a little over 3 years.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
I've been, piecing it together slowly, but, over that time period, a lot of information from my first book, was easy to, incorporate into the existing one, but in a lot more detail, where my other one is like 120 pages. It's more coffee table material. And this one, it's going on the bookshelf, right? You're not going to keep this on your coffee table. But, if somebody, needs the book and they can't afford to purchase it, email us. We'll send you a complimentary copy. I just want to get this out there to help people. I feel like it is fully all encompassing. Like I said, I tried to leave no stone unturned. I'm sure I missed a pebble somewhere, but I think this will help you no matter where you're at from the very beginning through the end. And it'd be good information for you even into the future, right? Because it talks about Medicare and it talks about different things and what's supported and what's not. And, I hope it will help somebody, and I would love to hear readers' comments if they get a copy and, want to give us some feedback on it.
That's a generous offer of you. And again, even if you're not caregiving, you can buy the book as a gift to someone else or for yourself, just to prepare, because this is a big, huge thing. This isn't a light little matter that's only going to last a short period of time. I mean, it could, depending on someone's diagnosis, but it could take years. I mean, like with my mom, who lived with dementia for 30 years, my dad with brain cancer, they gave him 1.5 years. He lived 4.5. The doctors don't always know lifespan and then what's going to happen during that time frame. Everyone's body is different, reacts to things differently, and has there's just so many different dynamics that fall into this that can really play hard. Now, Lance, you are also known as the senior care influencer, which this book really backs up for you. But I want to give people contact information. So we're going to have all of this in the show notes. You have your official website, Lance A, you got to have that middle initial, Slatton.com. You have your senior care influencer site. You are on LinkedIn, Instagram, Twitter, Facebook, and YouTube. And so very easily accessible. He has his own podcast on All Home Care Matters, where he interviews tons of people. And there's always great resources there. And the website is loaded with lots of wonderful resources as well. Plus AlzAuthors for books, if you're looking for that dementia angle as well. So this man is not to be taken lightly. He knows what he's talking about, and he's very well informed and understands all sides of this journey. And rarely do we find people that can talk from all those different angles. So thank you so much for taking the time to be with us, Lance. I really appreciate it.
Always a pleasure. Always a pleasure to see you, Lori. Thank you so much.
Thank you. And to our listeners, I always say be a giver of hope. Like, click, and share. Pass this information on. There are people that that are dealing with caregiving that you don't even know are dealing with caregiving, because it's not a conversation that we have enough of, and that we need to bring that to the forefront as well. And people like to get stuff from a trusted source, So don't make them have to Google and try to figure out what's there. The more we can show a presence that there is support, the easier people are going to be able to breathe and get on caring for their loved ones. So thanks, everyone. We will see you next time. Bye now.
Caring for someone with dementia is one of the toughest journeys, but you don't have to do it alone. I'm Allison Schreier, and my experience caring for my husband inspired me to create Zinnia, a therapeutic streaming service designed to support people living with dementia and reduce caregiver stress. Zinnia offers research-backed videos intentionally created for people with dementia, engaging, calming, and easy to follow. Whether you need to ease agitation, create moments of joy, or make daily routines smoother, Zinnia is here to help. Family and professional caregivers use our content to turn challenges into opportunities for connection. Accessible by subscription on mobile devices and connected TVs, Zinnia is simple to use whenever you need it. Because when caregiving feels easier, life feels better. Go to zinniatv.com and sign up for a free trial today. Use the code RESOURCE for 15% off an annual Zinnia subscription.